It's ridiculous. So that's why I'm trying to figure out what's his action that I create damage. Now keep in mind, I don't think there's anything that has to be up there to disrupt this problem. That is really hard to do. But that 5% garage space, kind of that they can back and forth, is it that they so much money? Yeah, I don't think so. Because he counts himself as really successful. Yeah. And he says, oh, the actual results are
yeah.
You know?
I think he started to get sensitive when he knew about how much his dad gave him. That's when I noticed he must have been afraid to sell a small load.
Yeah, but I think it's actually where that would show up, unless there's an investment as well. I can tell you it would show up. Partnership. That's a very relevant partnership. That's square. That's a very well, it's some either that he pays no taxes.
But it's supposed to be. It's got to be that he's not. It's got to be he has a lot of debt. He's like hiding that register.
Money is coming from somewhere. That's the other. That's the one place it's coming from. Or he's got investments that are whatever.
Part of that, like, maintenance.
Oh, yeah. There's something there that bothers me. And it's the same thing now when she started picking at him about taxes, etc., and all of that. That's when it gets weird. That's
spot where he was
What's the
classy, and they were about as classy as Jennifer Fire. How many times did I go there?
Do it, man. Where's your son? But yeah. I'm sorry to hear. Do you? Nice. My brother's had a dog. He's got a puppy. Yeah, he's been taken to up preschool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So they got like the older dogs that are teaching the young dogs. Yeah, teaching them how to behave. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So that's today.
No,
Sean, man. How you doing? You doing a little digital back here?
Yep. Audio's on.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Good deal. All right, so you're streaming it right now?
Yep.
That's fine. Yeah. How's all the neighborhood stuff? So how's your professional take?
For the most part, good. I mean, kid stuff has been fairly quiet recently. The last couple of days, it hasn't been.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
I actually saw Catherine. Right after kids like sniff for earbuds.
Earbuds. Yeah.
I've never seen that behavior before. Unfortunate.
Yeah. So, just trying to figure out. Yeah, just trying to figure out what to do.
Yep. Yeah, baby.
This is Yano.
So good guy.
I like your time, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, this was my second wedding tie. This is not my second wedding.
Which was the second wedding?
So not a second wedding, but like I got 2 ties, and this was the second one of them.
Gotcha.
The one I didn't end up wearing for the wedding. I got to figure out how to say that without sounding like my second wedding.
It's just a nice tie that I got.
Thank you.
I think the story loses
itself.
something in translation.
Oh,
Maybe I thought maybe you had 2 weddings, like one was.
Oh yeah,
family
that
and
would have made sense too. No,
That happens. That happens sometimes in
totally with the Jewish
cross-cultural relationships.
Yeah, you're right. No, I'm just one that.
I'm able to roll the punches. Man. I
Whatever.
invited you to my birthday party in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
It's been for a couple minutes.
No problem. Thank you. What's the one that's working? If you got someone, where it's at, then you can see it. Don't worry.
on it.
Yeah, I'm talking right now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this candidate forum for District 1. First with City Council, then the Mayoral Candidates. I'm Jayne Miller, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Canton Community Association. A couple of thank yous before we begin. I'd like to thank Chris Beal for helping with audio-visual and with live streaming this conversation. I'd like to welcome everyone that's here online. I hope they are able to feel like they're participating in that way. And if you would look at cantoncommunityassociation.org online to make sure that you're a member of this organization, that would be wonderful. I'd also like to thank Kathy Oldman and United Evangelical for always being great hosts for our community meetings here. I'd like to invite you to keep your eyes open for all of our public meetings that we have, at least 4 per year, about keeping our neighborhood informed and empowered. Without further ado, let's welcome Jayne Miller to moderate today.
We have a worldwide audience. If there's anything more. Thanks everybody for coming, and I know there's going to be people kind of drifting in here as we get started. This is an important election all the way around, including our local races. This is the 1st district, which is a competitive council district in the city of Baltimore. And so, without further ado, what I'm going to do, since we have 2 candidates, obviously, I'm going to have them introduce themselves and give them 30 seconds each to tell everybody what you want to know. Matt, will start with you.
Sure.
That's the Republican.
Now, Jayne, you didn't have to go and use the R word right off the bat.
That's not a liability in this district.
My name is Matt McDaniel, and out of 9 people who started off with this, we're now down to 2. And when we started off with 9, I said it before, and I'll say it today. You had people who cared very deeply about the community, and I think that continues today. I think people deserve, and now they have a choice in November, and that's not a bad thing. So, what I'm hoping to do tonight, I think that there are going to be points where we agree, maybe some points of contrast, but I think that's a good thing. For the last over a decade, we haven't had a choice in November. For 73 years, you've had only one party in control of the Baltimore City Council. So I think it's time to open up a dialogue and continue to have this discussion. I look forward to having it with you all tonight. Thanks.
Zeke.
Thank you all for coming out this evening, and to the millions of people watching on CNN tonight, thank you as well. It's exciting to be back in Canton. So just really quick about me, I'm a former Baltimore City public school teacher, taught in Sandtown and in Curtis Bay. What I recognized as I was teaching was that there wasn't enough emphasis within the schools I worked in on civic leadership and on building citizenship. I think that's a problem we see across our country, and it leads to some very questionable outcomes at the presidential level, but it's also a problem we have here in Baltimore. And so I started a nonprofit with some other teachers to teach civic leadership and community organizing to high school kids here in Baltimore. Over the past 6 years, we've been involved in passing 2 laws at the state level, the Maryland Dream Act and the Firearms Safety Act. And we've been doing a lot of work recently on youth job creation. I hope to take that same entrepreneurial spirit and that same push to create active citizenry to the city council. Ours is a council that needs some new life, needs some new blood, and I feel incredibly blessed and fortunate that in December, whether Matt or I win, we're going to have a new mayor and 8 new city council members. And I think that's a great thing for our city, and I hope to be a part of it. Thank you.
Last night, during the presidential debate, urban policy actually became a focal point as it pertained to policing. So I'm just going to ask you a really simple question. Who do you support for president? Matt?
We have a secret ballot for a reason. You know, Mr. Trump has yet to endorse in my race. Though he was over in Buffalo, he had the opportunity. So I don't think I'm going to endorse in the presidential race. I'd like to say I'm a Larry Hogan Republican. The governor's endorsed me. I like him for 2018, by the way, in case you all didn't know. I'll keep with the Larry Hogan mantra here. You know, I only know about one race that I'm voting for in November, and that's actually on the second page, guys. We're on the second page. And that's the only one I know about.
Zeke?
Hillary Clinton.
In the, also in the debate last night, like, as I mentioned about the issue of policing and policy, and it's pretty dramatic differences between the 2 presidential candidates. As we speak, the Department of Justice is here in the city of Baltimore now trying to negotiate a consent decree that will have to be followed under a court order, etc. Do you think that the person in charge of holding the city's feet to the fire on that consent decree should be an insider or an outsider?
Yeah, so when I was a teacher in Sandtown, I personally witnessed a lot of what was described in the DOJ report, which included rough treatment by citizens, and especially youth, from our police, and a broken relationship between officers and communities, particularly communities of color. It is no secret, and I think it was no secret before the Department of Justice issued their report that we have a lot of work to do on policing in our city and on what it means to do true community policing. Since the DOJ came to town, I've been participating with my students in several of the listening sessions. We've been showing up and sharing our ideas. Ultimately, I think the push needs to come from within Baltimore. We need to hold ourselves accountable and our officers accountable. I think part of that is changing the OBRA, the Police Bill of Rights. I believe civilians should be on the review board. And I believe that ultimately what we need to see is officers that are out of their cars, in our neighborhoods, walking the beat, engaging with folks, and building relationships, just like they used to do. And it's funny because you talk to a lot of the older folks in the district, and maybe this is just nostalgia, but they describe a time when they knew their officer by his or her first name, and they fed him cookies and milk, and you know, it was a little bit sunny, but I think that's what we need to re-envision is what does policing look like in 2016? And it's not the war on drugs, zero tolerance, jumping out of cars onto people. It's officers in our communities accountable to us, engaging with us. And I would also like to see a lot more of our police live in the city of Baltimore, because I think the geographic distance creates relational distance.
As far as who is going to enforce the consent decree, well, hopefully it's the Attorney General's office in the United States, the U.S. Attorney General's office, Ron Rosenstein, terrific. Realistically, I hope it never gets to that point. How many consent decrees does it take before we actually make some change? Education, DPW, all of the major places where the city or city government should actually be held accountable, we're under a consent decree because they failed over and over and over again. This is yet another one of those situations. And now look, I read the DOJ report. It is scathing, and people knew it was coming, and they were prepared for it, and we have to implement it. Having worked at the state's attorney's office, I actually kind of saw it from the other perspective. I worked in a sexual assault and domestic violence unit at the state's attorney's office under Greg Bernstein. And you got to see the overworked detectives, the patrol officers who didn't believe people. And when there are issues in the DOJ report about those exact issues, you kind of nod your head and say, yeah, this was coming. And so how many years does it take before you actually start to make some changes? Now, realistically, how much of that is going to come from the city council? Not much. But I don't want to politicize the police as much as anybody else. I don't think politicians should be the ones who tell the police how to do their jobs. Major Garrity in the Southeast is a good police officer. I trust him. He needs to come to the city council, and when he comes to us and says, this is what I need computers in my cars. I need more officers on the beat. We have a way to implement the DOJ reforms. My job is to go and make sure that those requests are satisfied. That's what a city council person can do. I don't necessarily need to antagonize. I need to be able to help facilitate a change. And I think that that's something that is actually really possible. I think it's something that Zeke and I might agree on. There are significant problems that divide people in the first district, and certainly in affluent areas versus less affluent areas, how policing affects people, on my street versus streets over in West Baltimore or over further up in East Baltimore. It's a real problem, and turning a blind eye to it or trying to politicize it isn't going to fix it.
So, Matt, I probably agree with 90% of that. The issue that I have is a little while back, you wrote on Facebook that you would like to see police on egress and ingress points to the first district, as well as security cameras, so that we can identify the criminals that are coming into our district. To me, that's pretty loaded, both racially loaded, politically loaded, and so my concern with rhetoric like that is that it further exacerbates the divide we have in our city and could contribute to a much worse situation than we already have with the police in our communities.
Now here's the problem. When I listen to what the major is saying, this isn't me saying it. I'm listening to what our police commanders are saying. And our police commanders are saying that people are coming into our district and committing crimes. Now again, I'm not running to be police commissioner. People far smarter than I am, and people who are less interested in politicizing the police than I am, have made conclusions. And I want to help them keep us safe. Look, if we're looking at it from a psychological perspective, your first need is to feel safe in your community. That's how you can bring about change. And look, on the security cameras issue, I think there's a real opportunity for innovation that we have. We have security cameras that aren't networked, that aren't linked. I want to give people an opt-in provision to be able to share their security camera footage with the police. I want to create an app. I was actually knocking on the doors. We have so many IT specialists in our district. We could create an app where when a crime happens in the district, an alert goes off for people within 1,000 feet of where that crime took place, and they can upload that video to the police. So we can apprehend the people who are committing crimes in the district. And that's what we need to do. We need to be innovative. We need to be looking for solutions, and we can't be politicizing the police. That's just not a recipe for success. That's a recipe for fewer police officers. That's a recipe for a less safe community. So, I mean, I guess it is. It's a point of contrast. That's my opinion.
Go ahead, because I want to ask a question too.
So just to be clear though, I've gone to every Southeast Police Community Relations meeting, and I've never heard Major Garrity speak about posting officers at egress or ingress points. That to me sounds like politicizing the police. And again, I would just say in this moment of hypertension and anxiety for our city, I think we need to bring people in, not keeping them out, not monitoring or surveilling them. I see a role for people having their own personal cameras with their houses, but to post cameras at entrance points into the first district, I think further exacerbates the segregation that we don't need in our city.
Yeah, but just to be clarified, so what is it, what do you envision as the execution of that idea?
So, which idea?
Of egress points, of having some kind of coverage.
Sure. Let's look at Patterson Park as a good example. I would love to have an officer station so that, I mean, we certainly don't have blue lights where people can report things. Look at college campuses. We have people, we have patrols, we have the ability to report to police officers and stations. You know, local stations are never really known local stations to be something that's particularly charged. I mean, maybe it is, I suppose. But realistically, Baltimore City does use surveillance. There's no expectation of privacy when you're walking outside. It's constitutional law. You have constitutional rights to your person, certainly, but you don't have an expectation of privacy in your location when you're walking outside. So, you know, I don't see, this is, I think, drawing a dog whistle where there isn't one. You know, letting our police our communities, I don't think is the worst thing in the world.
Let's say I'm policing the work. We asked this question during the larger forum that we had before the primary about the size of the Baltimore police budget. It will exceed $500 million when we fully account for the past fiscal year. The new one just started not too long ago. So I'm going to ask this question again because there is, if you look down the road, the deficit this year and this fiscal year could run as high as $80 million. As you look year after year down the road, it continues to cycle that way. So money's got to come from somewhere. Either you raise mechanisms to you do something to raise revenue, or you have to cut spending. Which is it? The city will be looking at a deficit of at least $80 million, likely, by the end of this fiscal year. So which do? You cut spending, or do you raise revenue?
I actually loved last year, they projected a $20 million deficit. They came out getting $60 million, and then the response to the mayor's office was, well, at least it wasn't $90 million. I love that. Love that spending. It's great. Now, I don't think that there are sacred cows in spending. I really don't. Anytime you have massive bureaucracy, it does need a fine-tooth comb. Certainly the police department is no exception. If they are getting hundreds of millions of dollars, we need to look at how every penny of taxpayer money is being spent. You know, if anything, that, regardless if it's police or DPW or wherever it is, if people are able to see where the money is being spent, it either facilitates the necessity for change, or you go in the direction of saying, I'm very happy that they're spending this money the way it's being spent. It's the 21st century. This should be searchable online. We're a major metropolitan jurisdiction. There is no reason you shouldn't be able to see where every penny, every check is going. All right? Now, with the police budget, you know, my goal is to make the necessary cuts that are recommended. You know, if that's a cut to overtime, if we're able to hire more officers, the number of overtime hours will go down. It'll actually be less expensive. But the reality is, we just don't know because there aren't audits. And that's not just the police department, but the transportation budget last year, they had to create books in order to audit them. It's a nightmare of bureaucracy for decades upon decades upon decades. And look, I love the police, but the police are no exception. You have decades of institutional bureaucracy that is sapping hundreds of millions of dollars. And I guess, not to monopolize time, but your question about how we actually raise revenue. I mean, in my mind, that's growing population. You have to have more people here. You can't, we're almost at the statutory cap on property taxes. You can't raise revenue by taxing people out of the city. You need more people to come here. In my mind, it's paying the property tax rate for rate in Baltimore County for the first several years of home ownership, you know. And looking at the ability to grow, if we grew 1% per year for 10 years, we're over 70,000 people.
Sure. Time to answer this question.
Yeah, so
Because you did touch down the, third rail taxes.
So you asked the same question, the primary, and my answer then, still my answer is, I would cut funds from the police. The challenge with it right now is because of the DOJ report and the consent decree that we're about to come under, it's going to be an unfunded mandate, and you know this. It's going to be in the tens of millions of dollars. And now folks don't want to hear that, but implementing the patterns and practices that we are going to be forced to implement is going to cost money, which is unfortunate because for me, we are spending way too much of our budget on policing our citizens. And I think a society that spends disproportionately on police instead of schools, rec centers, transit, infrastructure, I think that says a lot about our values as a city. And so I would still favor cutting funds from our police department. Now, I think the one point Matt and I agree on here is part of the challenge right now is that we are paying exorbitant overtime for our officers. They are run ragged, right? And they're tired, they're exhausted, they're racking up overtime. That is not a healthy ecosystem for Baltimore, for our police, for anyone. So I think part of the question is, how do we hire more officers? How do we bring them in? And I think the big question and challenge for our city is not how do we go to Virginia or Pennsylvania or any of these places and bring folks into Baltimore, because it really hasn't worked, but how do we grow our hometown here in this city? That's what I'm interested in seeing, is a generation of young people who are interested in being police or teachers or firefighters or any of these things that come from Baltimore City. And I think our city has too much of a inferiority complex in that we don't think our young people are ready to take on these types of jobs. Well, having spent the last 8 years working with kids in this city, I completely disagree. If the training was there, if we had the political will, we could have young people from Baltimore City become police officers. And I believe that's what we need to do. We need to learn best practices from other cities, but not keep overspending on bringing folks from out of state to police our city.
I want to talk about your own philosophies about running your office. So you have a city council office, you represent this district. How do you set your office up to best meet the needs of your constituents? People call, they complain, somebody can tell them to the sidewalk, etc. How do you envision setting up the office to be effective?
So my office, we want it to be a hub of innovation. We want to look at, again, best practices from around the country. We want, right now when people think about City Hall, innovation is not usually the word that comes to mind, but that should change, right? We should have our best and brightest wanting to work in city government. We have deep challenges in Baltimore. So why aren't the kids that come through Hopkins, Carey Business School, and Bloomberg, and University of Maryland School for Social Work, why aren't they gravitating towards City Hall? Why don't we scoop them up? We have all these wonderful programs. I came out of Teach for America, Baltimore Core, a again, why isn't City Hall reaching out and bringing people in? I'm very fortunate to have with me Mike Castagnola, who's my campaign manager and is going to run my office. Brilliant guy with an MIT planning degree. That's the kind of talent we need here in Baltimore. And so part of our plan is to bring a Baltimore Core Fellow into our office to do some external fundraising, to do that, to do some organizing within our Hispanic community, which is the fastest growing community in our city and in the 1st District. We are bringing a University of Maryland School of Social Work student into our office. And so we are going to do exceptional constituent services. We're still going to do the grind of making sure the trash gets picked up and the road gets paved. But I also think this is a moment for our city when people want to see more from their city council, right? You don't get 8 new city council members and a new mayor. You don't get that kind of turnover if folks are comfortable with the status quo. And so I think part of this is about how do we push and change what it means to be at City Hall, whether it's the mayor or the city council. What does that mean? And it should mean it is a space of innovation and wonderful things that are happening on the ground. So that's kind of what I'm excited to bring to this thing, is just a different focus that is both about getting the trash picked up and the constituent grind, but also thinking about citywide problems. And I've been working with some of my hopefully soon-to-be colleagues, Chris Burnett, Shannon Sneed, and Ryan Dorsey, and some of the folks that are coming in to think about not just how we can do right by the 1st District or the 13th or 8th, but how we can all do better as a city. And I think that's what people want their city council to do, is not just scrap over individual turf, but have a citywide vision and work toward it.
Matt, hold your opposite.
They have a mayoral forum today. Hello, folks. All right. This is one of those times when I love the idea of, saving the world and saving the city and flipping a switch and being transformational. But you know what? The city's a mess. We can't even balance a budget. And we have run 4 or 5 consent decrees. All right. I got to commend Jim Kraft for actually having a very competent staff. Certainly, we would pursue the same grants that Jim has pursued in order to keep the staff more than just one person, who I will certainly run that. But no, I'm sorry, I'm going to have a very nerdy office, and I apologize for that, because we're going to be looking at numbers, a lot of numbers, because we don't fix the city with ideas and rhetoric and feeling good about ourselves. We fix the city by first addressing the budgetary problems the city is under. Why aren't people living here? It's too expensive to live here. And not just our district, but that's something that is in the entire city, because you've had 70 years of institutional failure that's now culminated in a city that can be bankrupt within 10 years. So that's the city that we're living in. And I don't mean to be so negative about it. There are a lot of wonderful things that are happening in the city. But we've had stagnant growth. And if we don't bring more people in, the city will eventually start to falter. We already see the infrastructural problems that the city's had. We already see, name an issue that you brought here with you today, and I can point to 70 years of failure. 70 years of people getting up in front of you and saying this time it's going to be different, and yet it never changes. You have a right to be upset about things, because every 4 years the faces might change, but nothing else does. It's great rhetoric. It's terrific. I could promise you the world right now. Absolutely. But I'd be lying to you. And 4 years from now, I'd have to stand in front of you and try to spin this in a way that, well, we planted some trees, so we're changing the world. But that's not reality. So let's ground ourselves for a little bit. It might be boring, it might be nerdy, but we have institutional problems that we need to fix, and that's what my office will be about doing.
I would just say that we are not a failing city, that we are seeing growth, and that the growth is coming because of the amazing people that are in our city and in this room tonight. Pastor Jim, who's done a wonderful job of building a diverse church there in Canton and is bringing in young families and just great programming. Chris Beal doing awesome work over in Patterson Park. My friend Barb, who's an amazing citizen and participates all the time. Gunter, again, going after the slum landlords and doing right by his neighborhood. This is a wonderful, wonderful city. I have to mention Scott Goldman, who's the Vice President of Fellows Prospect, doing amazing work on public safety. Mark Edelson, who's one of the smartest guys I know on issues of transit. Corbin, this room is packed with brilliant people. And that's what's going to move our city forward. This is not a failing city. We are not on a downward trajectory. I don't believe any of the hype that the national media puts out there about Baltimore, because I live here. And I know how great the people are, and we need representation that steps up and matches that greatness.
I'm going to respond. Ladies and gentlemen, you now have your choice. And I think it's a very fair one. This is not a criticism. I think that is a very fair distinction between the two of us. I've looked at the numbers. The city is losing money. We are hemorrhaging money. The city's population growth rate has been flat. We might have the smartest people in the room, but unless we magically can clone them, we're not going to get out of our fiscal problems, our deficits, our debts, and our institutional problems. All the smart people in the room, and yet we haven't audited any city agencies. It's wonderful to have innovation from a community bottom-up perspective. But if we want to transition that into government, you need somebody who, again, is going to be a little bit boring, but who can actually deliver on what the promises are. And I think that's where you have your distinction. And that's not a bad thing. You have a choice. It's a good thing.
I want to open this up to the kind of question. Matt, I have to ask you this question because you would be the only Republican member of the council. So you'd be the only Republican in sight in the city of Baltimore's government structure.
One of like maybe 3 or 4 in the entire city.
Well, in terms of actually holding office. So how do you manage that?
Sure.
I mean, what do you do with that? You wouldn't tell us who you're going to vote for president, but what would you do with that?
I got to really commend Barack Obama in 2008 on the issue of framing. Being able to take a discussion where there was no movement and really kickstarted the idea for change. Now look, I might run and I might say, whoever our next mayor is, look, Mayor, I want to work to what is, let's say, transportation fund. I know, I've looked at the budget, you don't have the money to add this bus route. You don't have the money to fund the circulator. You don't have the money, to integrate a multimodal transportation system. But here's what I can do. I can go down to Annapolis. I can talk to the governor. And I can work with City Hall. Be that bridge that hasn't existed for years. And if that's not enough, look, I can run to the right a little bit from the mayor and give them the leverage that they need to be able to open up progress, and real progress, like lowering taxes, making things more affordable, preventing the implementation of a $15 minimum wage, which I think is going to kill businesses and kill jobs. So that's the reality. And my little one little vote might not change the world. But what it can do is allow me, also, the great thing about it is, I'm sure I get the coverage of WBAL when I bring someone in front of us and start questioning them. Because, it's actually probably pretty fun. Because no one's going to call me into their office and say, you can't ask those questions. Of course I can ask those questions. I'm only covering the people in the 1st district. There's no institutional plan. There's no 5 of us, no big voting block that's going to come in. And I think we can actually do some real good for people. That's my
Zeke, I'm going to ask you a question a different way, and that is that I don't think that anyone would argue that the Baltimore City Council has been, kind of in lockstep for the most part. I mean, there has been some resistance to the mayor, et cetera, but how do you function as a member of the council when you have a strong mayor form of government and you may be asked to just fall in line.
So I think we are at a really interesting juncture in our city when it comes to governance. Like I said before, you got 8 new city council members coming on, and what I think is going to be different about this crew of folks is that you're going to see that level of independence. You're going to see people actually reading the budget, going line by line, and making sure everything is kosher. You're going to see folks working together across the district lines. You know, what we said in my campaign is we've got to care just as much about the lives of people north of Fayette Street as those south of Fayette Street. Even though that's going to be Shannon Sneed's district, we can't continue to have a city where each city council person is running their own little fiefdom and only cares about the interests of their constituents. Because if we continue to have concentrated poverty to our north, to our east, all over the place, we will not grow, we will not rebuild as a city. So I think what you're going to see, again, with Chris and Shannon and John and Ryan and all these young, smart, energetic, progressive folks is something different. I mean, this to me is a historic election here in Baltimore with the new council that's coming on. And I think it's exciting. And I think there's a lot of energy in our city about what we can do collectively, not just for Zeke's district or Shannon or anyone else, but what we can all do to make this city a better place for everybody.
From the audience. Go ahead.
So I was at the earlier forums, you said you were opposed to deadline, which, I can understand it's not a problem, but you also said you want to talk about transportation and their situations. So, I'm a cyclist in the city, holding your cycle track, for example, and I think you're kind of putting your priorities in your places when you're saying that you don't want to support transportation projects that probably people want to have. For example, you move here to Baltimore, and yet you don't want to pay for increasing finance for transport. So I don't understand how you can bring people here. If people really want transportation, the only reason why people don't want to live here is not just the taxes, it's part of it around. So I'm wondering what you would say to that. Sure.
This is a transportation question about Matt's opposition to the red line, and kind of your vision about transit.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the question. All right, we're good. Thanks for the question. I oppose the red line. I oppose any attempt to bring it back, and it's not coming back as long as the governor's the governor. So even if it's going to be resurrected, it'll be at least 4 to 8 years from now. I opposed it for the reason that, it might have been a real good idea when Harris McDaniel proposed it, but the modern reality of Fells Point and Harbor East is just not conducive to a project. Welcome to a project where you say you're going to spend $1 billion and take 7 years. Look at a federal project that's finished on time and ahead of budget. It just doesn't happen. So I just didn't think it was realistic. Now, again, I could promise you, in 20 years, we're going to have self-driving cars that will eliminate the traffic problem. I could promise you that Baltimore could be the innovator for that. But the reality is, what can we do as a city to get transportation under control? A great example was, I was at a meeting, they gave us a nice briefing on the Perkins Homes redevelopment. And one of the ideas that they had put forward was make it easier to go out Fayette Street if you're going out from Harbor East, and really to eliminate the congestion in Fells Point and in Canton. I think that's a great solution. It wouldn't cost a lot of money. It's only part of the project that's coming in. The reality is, and I don't mean to be snarky with my answer to you, is if I could go back in time 60 years, I could fix a lot of the transportation problems we have in the city. But realistically, the way we've been developing, the way we've kind of had this ad hoc policy of just slamming things down and not really thinking about what the long-term ramifications are is a problem that the city has. So what I could tell you is, going forward, you need a unified plan of how these developments, how these new projects are going to affect the way in which people get around the city. And it's not an easy answer. And I don't need to dodge your question, but the reality is, anybody telling me that they're going to pull out of the sky this wonderful plan that's just not going to happen. So realistically, Baltimore Link is a good start. We can improve on it. I've heard about ways to improve on it. And I think that people are listening about the ways to improve on it. And certainly, I'd be open to listening to you and then taking the ideas down, because the city can't afford it. So taking your ideas down to Annapolis and getting them to invest in it too. But thanks for the question.
Zeke, you want to answer the transit question?
So I did support the red line, and that did not always make me the most popular person in Canton. But I believe in it. I believe in high-speed rail. I believe in light rail. I believe that no great American city moves forward unless its people can move. And right now, people in Baltimore, especially folks who can't afford cars, which is a lot of our city, can't move effectively. So I favored the red line. How do you turn down $1 billion from the federal government to do this major project? It would have put folks to work. It would have connected East and West Baltimore, which is critical. When you talk to millennials like us, a lot of them don't want to use their car. They want to be able to get from east to west to Hopkins to over here without a vehicle. I think the red line, choosing to not approve the red line, was a critical mistake. I would also say that many of our developers and business community agree with me. A lot of the development we've done here in South Baltimore is contingent on the red line. And so now it's a disaster on Alisana, on Fleet Street. As Harbor Point comes online with Exelon and all the growth over there, it is going to be a nightmare to move people around. So I think that was a huge mistake not to do the red line. That being said, we have to invest in complete streets. We have to think about biking in a serious, integrated way. I'm excited to see the bike share program come online. I'm excited to see some of the dedicated bike lanes, but I think it's not enough. This city needs to get serious about providing people a way to get around that doesn't involve their vehicle. Because I'm hoping that when I run for re-election in 4 years from now and I knock doors in Canton, the number one problem is not still parking. And it's only going to be that way. It's only going to be that way if we don't invest in public transit. So I think it's absolutely critical, and I would just say I'm glad my friend Mark Edelson is here, who does a ton of thinking about transit. That's the type of folks that I want around thinking about this stuff from our city government.
We have about 2 minutes left. Someone asked a question that is short. Go on all the way back. Short answer.
Yes, sir.
Quick question. I know you're in support of the guaranteed $50 donation now. Isn't that an mandate on small? I thought it was small investment.
$15 minimum wage.
Okay. So I do support raising the minimum wage to $50 an hour. Let me say this. I think we need to do it in a really thoughtful way. I think we need to look at what other places around the country are doing. I think the legislation that Mary Pat Clark initially put out was not the right legislation. Just to do it would disrupt small business in the first district. So I think having some carve-outs, thinking about it with a scalpel, being smart, being thoughtful, we can do it in a way that's good for our business community, because we know that when people have more money in their pocket, they spend it in small businesses. It goes back into the ecosystem, and also good for people. I would just say when I worked in West Baltimore, one of the fallacies we have in our city is that folks living in poverty don't work. That's not true. Oftentimes, the parents and kids I was working with worked multiple jobs and still couldn't make it work, because you can't live on $8, $9, or even $10.10 an hour. when you have kids. And so I think in the richest country on earth, it is a shame that we have folks working full-time hours and still living in poverty. And I don't want to be a part of it. And so if I were elected to the city council, I would absolutely raise the minimum wage, and I would do it in a thoughtful way with my colleagues so that we don't kill our small businesses, so that they're at the table in the conversation, but we help folks lift themselves out of poverty.
Can you guarantee your loss of jobs or businesses, big loss of businesses?
Sorry, say it one more time.
I said, can you guarantee if you raise the minimum wage, there will be no loss of jobs or no loss of businesses in the city?
There's no guarantee on anything. No, I can't guarantee there won't be any loss of jobs or loss of businesses in the city, but I still think it is the right thing to do. Just fundamentally, morally, it is wrong to have people living in poverty that work 40 hours a week plus.
Folks, government is not the moral arbiter of anything, nor should it be. The problem here is that it fundamentally misunderstands the way in which business even works. We can discuss the relevancy of the minimum wage in a post-industrial service-based economy till the cows come home. But let their federal legislators decide that, because they're the ones who control the tax code, because there are ancillary costs to raising the minimum wage. There's wage pressure on, certainly if you raise the minimum wage, you will have people who are demanding more. There are unemployment insurance costs. There are so many ancillary costs to business. And look at the nonsense bill that was proposed. You have poison pill provisions in that. It creates a regulatory structure where 2 of the commission members are members of labor, 2 of the commission members are members of the community, and 1 commission member is a member of business. That immediately sets up an antagonistic relationship on this commission. Now, again, what's a franchise in Baltimore? A franchise in Baltimore is 2 locations. There's a franchise exception, there's no franchise exception. Now, certainly we could fiddle with the logic, but you're not changing the tax structure of the federal government on these businesses. I agree with the editorial board of the Baltimore Sun, who opposed the $50 minimum wage being instituted in Baltimore. It was a smart piece, and I agree with it. If you want to do it, have your state legislators do it. Don't force it on Baltimore City, and put businesses out of business and put workers out of a job. It's just baseline economics.
Okay, I think we're good, and I think that we're kind of a few minutes past time. So these are the 2 council members that are the 2 candidates for city council from the 1st district. Matt and Zeke. Thank you for your time. We're going to take about a 10-minute break and then go to our mayoral candidates.
Thanks for that again.
Okay.
Pleasure. This one done?
State appointments, exits. I think that's kind of really a change. I think it's amazing. Achieve the same thing. Oh.
How's it going? Tech guy? It's the live stream?
Yeah.
I'm Josh here.
Pleasure.
How's it going? Good to see you. Josh.
I said it one time. Anyone ever say yourself, you say your standards, and I think I'll look at it, it's not really. I've walked, I've actually, one time, twice, it was like, sitting there. There's always something to go, always something short, something like that. Something was saying, it was very like,
Did you get that other one up and running?
User. Yeah, that's a user process. Yeah. Didn't feel like fiddling with it. So it's a second mic right there. So.
Let's hope she shows up. I feel like at this point it's I don't know if she loses any political capital for the job. Who's the point of contact? I think it was Sean. So she knows this. It's Doug, he's not here, so I'm not sure.
They want to make that a 2-bus trip just to get there, which is ridiculous. They had a bus line as one who was written many buses. They're like limited stops. The old limited stops. There's 48 restrictions. University of Maryland, Brickness, Towns. There's one that goes all the way from Pugh downtown, Little River. But everyone's going to live there. They just have to think of what
That's how you.
same dinner around. some people recently now that we're number 10. Okay. So, yeah.
One of my old birds, but that's my new.
Well, to me, it was a big work. You put your social media based on the computer.
Hey, are you?
Related to social media. This is the same thing. And it's going to be, and most people, just put a survey. It's just
Hey, do you know who's running audio around here? Are you in?
I'm not, but I know that it's right there. You need to put it up or down or mess with the gain. Yeah. The guy who was doing audio, he left when he did this setup. He said there was an out in the back of this. If you wanted to try it, he also said the last day he tried it.
So it's got to be a speaker, right?
Yeah, I thought they were just going to the house. Yeah, I think it's just these guys.
It'll be speaking inside.
Yeah, and
I can use my mic.
yeah, those speakers on the sides, and they also have speakers in that back area. Yeah, so I don't know if they're coming out under. Yeah, so you can audio test. All right, cool. Thanks.
How are you? Good to see you. Okay. Oh, no, we can hear it. Yeah, no problem. Yes, that's correct. All right, everybody, we're going to get started, restarted with our mayoral candidates.
All right.
Senator, just be careful of those wires.
Okay. We have on the left Captain Pugh, the Democratic nominee for mayor, Alan Walden, the Republican nominee, and Josh Harris, the Green Party candidate. Is a case one nominee. I'm going to start with all of you with the same question that I asked the two council candidates, and that is, we had a heavily watched presidential debate last night that involved discussion of urban policy. So I'm just going to start by asking, who are you voting for president?
I am supporting Dr. Jill Stein for president.
Alan?
I'll let you know on November 9th.
Catherine?
Hillary Clinton.
In the city of Baltimore this year, I'd just like to start with kind of a question about perception. The Orioles just finished their season, their home season, and their attendance this year was down 9%. Some have suggested to me that that is a residual effect of the unrest from last year, and that our surrounding areas have become increasingly, this is a term one of my Twitter followers use, city phobic. Do you agree, and how do you fix it? Catherine?
Well, we know that one of the things that has to happen is the narrative about Baltimore needs to change. It needs to change to the people who live in the city, and it needs to change to the people outside of the city. So it's how we go about the business of rebranding Baltimore. But we do have some issues, and one of the things that you all know that we're working on is community policing. I think that with the unrest that occurred in our city, that it has instilled fear in many people throughout our communities. But we've got to fix the issue around community policing. We've got to fix the issue around respect for police and police for communities. And so as we went to Annapolis last year to focus on reforming the Bill of Rights for police officers and retraining our officers to meet the needs of our communities, whether it's mental health issues, homelessness, and criminal activity. And I think you saw some major things that are happening around drug addiction, which is a major problem in our city. For rebranding Baltimore, we just got to talk to a couple of executives about how to go about the business of doing that. We're getting people working. We've got 76,000 people who are unemployed in our city. We've got 3,000 people who are sleeping on our streets. And I think people want to know how you can go about the business of fixing it. And at the same time, when you got 25% of the population that don't have high school diplomas, and another 38% that does not have, don't read above the 6th and 8th grade level, that means that the city has to do its part in educating the population. It has to do its part in improving our public school system, and we've got to look to our philanthropic community, our business community, and our surrounding jurisdictions and the state about putting real resources into the city's school system and into the city. I mean, we can't do it all by ourselves. This is a city that was built for many people, down to 620,000, and we have great opportunities for growth, but at the same time, we've got to fix the social bills that plague our neighborhoods and our communities. I don't think it's a quick fix, but at the same time, I see what Hopkins is doing in terms of their investment in the neighborhood. I see what we're doing with some of the biotech areas, but what the philanthropic community has to understand understand is that we have people who have capacity and capability who live in those neighborhoods that we're not investing in, and we have to put some of those resources where the people who know how to get things done can get it done.
Josh, can you answer that same question about the perception of Baltimore City?
I believe that the perception of Baltimore City is it's a realistic issue. It's something we have to deal with. But I also believe that it won't be changed until we begin to see action steps. And when we talked about, we brought up the presidential debate last night, a few words that were never mentioned were poverty, working class, and poor. And so understand that Baltimore City is a working class city, and effectively a blue collar town that has been without blue collar work since General Motors and Bethlehem Steel, which left thousands of people, not hundreds of thousands of people, without college degrees who used to working with their hands and doing blue collar work without the ability to provide for their family. So when you talk about the unrest that occurred last spring, we really have to get to substantively addressing the root cause of that, the root cause of the crime in our city, which of course is poverty. So I'm not asking questions, but bringing solutions to the table on how we bring industry back to Baltimore City, transition Baltimore City from a blue collar town to a green collar town, which is why my platform, Banking for Baltimore Undivided, is specifically addressed bringing clean energy manufacturing and production in Baltimore City to put thousands of Baltimoreans back to work. Because until we begin to see the raising of the median family household income in Baltimore City, we won't be solving problems, we'll merely be displacing them. And so my focus is on solutions, not displacing them.
Alan? And Captain, you're saying, please don't.
I came to Baltimore.
Go ahead.
I came to Baltimore about 3 decades ago from New York and never looked back. And from that moment on, from the moment I became familiar with the city, I became its advocate. I became a drumbeater, a tough thumper for the city of Baltimore because I fell in love with it. There are things about it right now that need to be celebrated. The perception of Baltimore out there in the great world is basically inaccurate because nobody talks, we spend too little time talking about what we have here that is already good. There are extraordinary things about Baltimore that very few other cities can offer, and we should be, instead of apologizing constantly for the things that are wrong, we should be celebrating the things that are right. Now, that's not to say we don't have to agree with issues that have to be addressed and problems that have to be solved. Relations between the police department and the civilian population, for example. There is a myth that the Black Lives Matter movement began with what happened in Ferguson, Missouri a couple of years ago, and that it was exacerbated by what happened during the Freddie Gray case. In point of fact, the Black Lives Matter movement began in Baltimore in 1985, when Karen Mitchell was a member of the House of Representatives. It was Karen Mitchell who stated, "Us killing us equals genocide." Actually, fratricide would have been more accurate, but he said genocide. And a little later on, that Mayor Kurt Schmoke appealed to the people of Baltimore. Cooperate with the police department. Help them do their jobs so that we can reduce the crime rate, reduce the drug addiction rate, make the city safer. Baltimore even now is not an unsafe city, listed as what I think the 6th most dangerous city in the country. But if you pick and choose your neighborhoods, that is either very true or it's not true at all. The issue here is between police and the civilian population, mutual respect and understanding. No doubt about it. There are police procedures and there are police tactics that have to be resolved. But in the communities themselves that are held in thrall, that are held captive by gunmen, by drug dealers and others who shoot up the city. 18 people last weekend, 8 in one incident, a 3-year-old among them. The people of the communities have to get over the idea that the police department is an occupying force. They are the guardians of the community. I've spoken with an array of them, black, white, Hispanic, young, old, and the majority of them simply want to do their jobs and are committed to it.
Are you
But the
on the job?
population in general simply has to stand up and say, yes, we're going to cooperate, they can't hide in plain sight anymore, we'll do something about it.
On the topic of policing, currently, the internal order of police contract is under negotiation. It expired on June 30th, and there's not been a new contract that has been negotiated. One of the sticking points is the reluctance of the union to allow citizen participation in disciplinary hearings. How do you overcome the resistance of the police union to reform? Catherine?
Well, let me just say that when we went to Annapolis last year, we were given the right to allow individuals to sit on the trial board. And that was working with the various police forces throughout the state. What we are going to do this legislative session, because it is part of our legislative agenda, is take it out of the union negotiation. And I've talked with some of the members of the police force who are willing, to let that happen. I know that the FOP will not be happy with that, but until we allow participation by individuals who live in our communities, we will not get the kind of cooperation that we need. I think that this mandate will happen because the city delegation will make it a priority to acquire their legislative agenda. But at the same time, we have to give concern as it relates to even the police officers living in our city. We know now currently 75% of our police officers don't live in the city. Just got through talking to the board of realtors about allowing police officers to live even in their apartment buildings at a lower rate because of the costs that are estimated in terms of just renting property. We went to Annapolis this past session and provide now incentives for police officers to live in our city, first-time responders. But we've got to do a better job of gaining that cooperation. But we do have the right as legislators to change that, to take that out of the bill.
Josh, what do you do about the resistance of the police union to reform?
I think that it's Baltimore set a precedent by, of course, with the law enforcement officers' bill of rights, and there's so many other precedents that we have seen in the state of Maryland with policing, and I think we need to set a precedent by dispelling and really putting the community at the center of how we police in our city. So we begin to see steps taken towards a true community-based policing model, but we have not seen true community-based policing where the community members are involved in the process from the recruitment and training of the officers all the way through, including substantive review, should an infraction occur. And so that includes making sure that we have metrics in place to hold our officers accountable, to ensure that the citizens of Baltimore, you and I, will no longer foot the bill when an officer is found to be doing wrong. They have to be held accountable on themselves, and they're be financially responsible, should I say. There has to be those measures be put in place. And the FOP probably isn't going to be happy with that. This is a decision we have to make, quite frankly. Baltimore City really needs to take control of our police department. I'm seriously looking into the possibility of what it would look like to start over a totally different agency that is policing Baltimore City, so that we have complete control over our police department here in the city, to really make sure there's accountability, responsibility, and transparency. And we also know that just moving officers into the city, when we look at cities around the country that mandate officers to live in the city, like Chicago, where I'm originally from, we know that it's not just about having them live in the city, because that doesn't change the culture of policing. We're looking at really having to reshape the culture and how our police officers view the community, and making sure that they're viewing the community as assets and that they're here to protect and serve those who pay their salaries effectively, and making sure that we're dealing with the restoration of relationships that really needs to occur. And that means not pointing the finger at the Baltimore City Police Department. As an athlete, my entire life, understanding the concept of team. The Baltimore City is a team. And sometimes when you play team sports, you may have a teammate who drops the pass or that misses the shot. And you can't point the finger and blame that teammate, but you have to coach them through getting better. And that teammate also has to own up to the mistakes that they made. Otherwise, they will not be able to get better. And so we want to move forward as a city. This is a collaborative relationship, really understanding that we all do better, and we all do better. It's not really about making the community is at the center of the process.
We have an adversarial relationship that has developed between the FOP and the police department and the public at large. The FOP is a union. What is a union supposed to do? It's supposed to support its membership and act on behalf of its membership. Sometimes, however, that is counterproductive when it forgets, when any union forgets what its job is, what the job of its members are. The Baltimore City Police Department is an agency in flux right now. It is in need of adjustment. As I said earlier, there's no doubt about that. The FOP must step up, as far as I'm concerned, and say yes. We know there are things that are wrong. We know there are things that can be fixed. We know there are things that should be fixed. And send a clear message to the people of the community that they not only represent the police, they represent the people the police are enlisted to serve and to protect. There should not be this constant adversarial relationship between men and women. We give them a badge, we give them a belt full of equipment, and we say, go out and protect us. But don't do it too well, because if you do it too well, we may not approve of it. Civilian oversight or civilian involvement makes a good deal of sense, provided it does not overwhelm the agency, which is put in place for the specific purpose of providing the public service and public safety.
Like parts of other parts of the city, some other parts of the city, one of the pressing issues in southeast Baltimore, this district, is traffic and parking. Anybody who travels in southeast Baltimore in the morning or the evening knows that it is a congested routes for commuters and residents alike. What do you do to ease that problem, to make life better for both business residents in southeast Baltimore? What needs to be done to fix the traffic congestion in this district?
So when we look at sustainable community development, what has worked around the nation and around the country, it's that density that really makes communities great. Where you can have corner stores, you can be able to walk to and from. But what the problem is that when all those community members have cars. So really understanding what makes cities great worldwide is great public transit. So making sure that we are providing access to great public transportation to connect our city, a city that's divided in many ways. Interconnectivity is key to that process. And so the red line, when we were proposed, it would have been a great way to really begin to chip away at that. And as a Green Party candidate, really understanding that we have to go to war with cars for multiple reasons. Whether we look at ease of access to and from work and making sure we're providing transportation to that, or whether we're looking at reducing our carbon footprint and what that means for the environmental sustainability in the long term. So creating and providing world-class transportation system is definitely a priority for me. In fact, next week we'll be releasing my public transit housing infrastructure platform that specifically goes into detail on what a solar rail system that interconnects our city would look like and how it would eliminate traffic and provide ease of movement from east, west, north, and south of Baltimore City.
Catherine, how do you fix the problems of congestion in a district like this?
First of all, I think we have to understand where the dollars for transportation come from. 95% of the dollars for transportation in Maryland come from the state and the federal government. So the relationship with the federal and the state government is important. While, I was a supporter of the red line, many people in this community were not supportive of the red line. And the other issue was that the city did not have a plan B. And so it really is sitting down with the community and figuring out how they want this issue resolved in their neighborhoods. One of the things that's been talked about just in this area is how much more development can a particular area or community take, because we're making, the development is helping to make the area more congested. So how do we go about making sure that we accommodate the needs of the people who live in the city? Is there a circular system that really works? We can't continue to tax people to death when we're already parking taxes are as high as they can possibly be. That's how we fund the circular. But moving east, west, north, and south, how do we connect the city in such a way with a public transportation system that meets the needs of the community? Those solutions have to come with sitting down with the community and understanding what kind of transportation needs that they want. We realize that cars on the road certainly are not the complete answer, but we do have to fix, are there roads that can be Why are there different routes in and out of the city? And we can provide access and entrance ways into this area. But at the same time, what kind of development are we going to continue to allow to take place in an area where everybody wants to develop it, but with a little bit of concern about the people who already live here, the people who invested here, who want to stay here and plan to grow their families and live here. I think those discussions, when we went through this with the zoning process, and people in this neighborhood said, stop, enough is enough. And I think that we have to listen to the community when they say that enough here, in other parts of the city that certainly do need development, certainly would like more housing, certainly would like more retail, and I think we need to spread it out around the city of Baltimore and stop concentrating just certain portions of the city.
I'd also like to add to that we be looking at what the key streets look like, making sure that we have the streets that are bikeable, walkable, and have straight transit, and then should there be a need to use cars that is there. And also, we speak specifically with financing these projects. We're going to go through a question about finance later, but how we pay for these things. And my platform, Bank for Baltimore, provides the state of this policy called public banking, really understanding the debt grip that Wall Street has on us and how it impacts us locally, and how we can remove ourselves from it as a city and take control of our economic future. Knowing that right now, our money, our $2.7 billion operating budget is sitting in the bank on Wall Street. And that bank is doing what banks do. They're getting rich off of it, making their CEOs and investors wealthy, while the cities need delivering a return on that. Then, in fact, we go up to Wall Street to take out municipal bonds like we're going to do in Fort Covington. $660 million in the year. In some cases in Baltimore City, we're paying up to 15% interest on those muni bonds. And the citizens end up putting that bill, property taxes, fees, fines, and assessments to make up for the debt that the city has incurred. If we would simply remove our money from that Wall Street bank and open up our own Baltimore City public bank, we can then leverage our own budget that's coming in every year, make the same investments that they do on Wall Street, except for now, every penny of interest earned comes back to the city of Baltimore and back to the citizens of Baltimore. So we can say immediately we want 40% of that interest to start, for me, to go directly towards education, make sure our kids can drink the water, that they have heat in the wintertime and air conditioning in the summertime. We can say we want another 20% of that interest earned to go immediately towards transportation infrastructure to begin to make sure that we can put world-class transportation systems in our city. Finding so many other great things. Even if we just started with our $98 million rainy day fund and opened up a Baltimore City public bank, the type of interest we would be able to accrue and return on profit would be amazing when the investments we'd be able to make in the city with that.
Right? At the end of World War II, the three big automakers had all these engines left over that weren't going to go into the building of military vehicles anymore. So they went on an advertising campaign, and they went to the big cities around the country, and they said, we're going to make buses. You all need buses. Nice, big, smelly buses to carry your people from point to point. Get rid of those trolley car lines. You don't need those. And we did. Almost every city in the country did that. Big mistake. Because there is no more environmentally friendly, more efficient way to move large numbers of people than by rail. I am a mouth-frothing supporter of rail transit. I think the red line was a good idea gone bad. I don't want to dig big holes in parts of Baltimore City anymore. I want everything on the surface. I have proposed a light rail line running from the lake to North Avenue. I know there are people in this part of town who are not inclined to believe that a light rail line or a trolley car line would be good for it. I disagree. I think it would be very good for it because it moves large numbers of people swiftly and efficiently. It moves them in an environmentally friendly manner. We need east-west rail service as we now have north-south. And let's not overlook the possibility of a rail line circling the Beltway to connect the various neighborhoods, to connect the various parts of the city. There are all kinds of possibilities. Rail, light rail, trolley car lines are relatively easy to build and easy to maintain because they're on the surface. And they do something else. They imply energy. They imply movement. They help the communities through which they run.
The city has a circulator.
The
city has a circulator service that has been popular in many cases, but also an economic challenge and a fiscal challenge. So should the circulator extend through Canton?
The Job City Circuit, as far as I'm concerned, is a very good idea. Excellent.
We're gonna run out of time, so I really ask you to keep your.
It was an excellent idea.
60 seconds.
I'm not sure an expansion would be the correct thing to do at this time, but I certainly would not reduce the service as has been proposed by eliminating.
How do you pay for it? How do you pay for it?
So I think I just presented an opportunity to pay for it, how we pay for it specifically, but also understanding in my platform is participatory budgeting. And understanding we have 14 councilmatic districts, and those residents who reside in those districts understand how they function best and what's most effective and efficient for them. So imagine if each councilmatic district was given dollars budgeted to decide what was developed within their community. That's something that we haven't seen. That my entire campaign is about taking the decision-making process away from the bureaucracy and constraints of City Hall and corporate interests and putting it into the hands of the people that are impacted most. And so with participatory budgeting, we see this. With public banking, we see this. And to answer your question about the circulator, the biggest need for transportation in Baltimore City is for low-income communities to have access to job hubs. And so when we talk about expanding transit, we need to make sure that, again, understanding that Baltimore City or Canton is not an island alone. We can all do better than we all do better. So making sure that your job as mayor is to be mayor of the entire city, to make sure that Baltimore City thrives, providing access to those low-income communities to job hubs so that they can begin to be employed and we can work to again see the raising of the median family household income in Baltimore City.
The circular is paid by our current paid property tax. And I think that we need to look at other revenue streams for the circular. You know, whether if it's going to Hopkins University of Maryland and you're supplying folks with workers, maybe we ought to give fees for those institutions. And when you think about the port in Anne Arundel County, where other opportunities for employment exist, Social Security, you know, what is wrong with looking at rapid transit running from downtown to Anne Arundel County, downtown to the port, downtown to Social Security, and centralize that? We need to create hubs of transportation where people can travel to different parts of the city and to the county where employment opportunities exist. But there are hubs of employers in our city, and I've seen what Johns Hopkins University has done in terms of investing in its own employees. Just sold 49 houses over Eager Village, where they invested $35,000 per employee for that development. And you can see the mixed communities coming together and working together. But it has to be not just the city or people just paying taxes. It's other revenue streams that we can look at that I think will enhance transportation. But transportation should also, we should also look at expanding our rail system currently that is in existence. But that's not a conversation just with the city. That's a conversation with the national regulators that run that system currently. Should not our hours of Amtrak extend past 10 o'clock to go back and forth to Washington, D.C.? I mean, these are the kinds of conversations that you have with your federal leaders as well as your state leaders.
I want to open to the audience questions. Yes.
Every year we love it. After coming to the city council, we say every year we're losing money on the health food test sent by the city. If either one of you were elected mayor, would you cease the city owning the health food test?
Would you repeat the question?
The Hilton Hotel, Convention Center, so it's called the Hilton Convention Center Hotel. The hotel that overlooks Camden Yards was built through the sale of bonds by the city in 2000. The project started in 2005, completed in 2008. The question is, every year it loses money. As mayor, would you cease the operation of the hotel by the city? I have that correct?
Right.
I'd like to find a private company, a private sector company to run that hotel. I don't think the city of Baltimore should be in the hotel business. I don't think that's something that government should be involved in to the exclusion of the private sector.
Josh, do you have an answer?
Yes, needs to become a functioning asset in Baltimore City. For me, I would not sell it. I think that it's a matter of systems management, effective systems management, getting the right leadership in there. And so what I've been looking at is actually something called the EB5 initiative, which is a federal initiative that allows international investors incentives to come and open up their businesses. And that is a city that is 45 minutes away from our nation's capital, with an hour and a half from Philadelphia, 3 hours from New York, and an international port city. It is prime opportunities for us to attract international investors to use the Hilton Hotel for business operations. So that's something I'm currently exploring.
Catherine, what's your answer to that?
Well, I think it certainly is worth exploring whether the city should be in the hotel business, period. I don't know many cities that are in the hotel business. I do know colleges and universities that are in the hotel business. So as one who seeks to become the next mayor of Baltimore City, I think it is certainly worth evaluating whether or not we should be in that business. Is it a profitable? Can it be profitable? Is it an asset worth holding on to? But, you know, in my personal opinion, I don't think the city should be in the hotel business, but it certainly is an asset that we need to look at and see if it can be profitable. And if, in fact, there is a period of time in which we should sell it.
I'd love to hear some plans around homelessness. Some of our citizens that are housing insecure or food insecure. I've been working, I'm a point of contact for a lot of people coming into churches, and a lot of my sisters and brothers in ministry are. And I find the current system labyrinthine, and organizations don't work well together. I'd love to hear a conversation around collaboration and streamlining that process.
So, homelessness is definitely a big issue. And is Ms. Flowers still here? I just want to say hello. She's a huge advocate for homelessness. And just a couple of weeks ago, we slept out under the Fallsway to bring awareness to homelessness and to hear people's stories of why they were there. And so it was really an eye-opening experience to be there firsthand. All too often, we drive past it and we forget that those are people. We forget the human factor of it, and understanding that we don't know people's stories and why they end up in the situation that they are. And so to take the time to hear those stories. But to respond to your question, yes, the city's services around homelessness is archaic, quite frankly. And we need to really streamline and make sure we're putting efficient services in and make sure that we're getting the word out of what resources are available, as well as efficiently spending dollars. Quite frankly, I'm a fiscal Republican. I believe that we should effectively and efficiently spend our tax dollars. And that's something that we're not doing. When you look at the amount that we're spending on hotels, to send people to hotels in the county versus in the city. But we have taken steps in the right direction by moving toward the continuing care model housing first recently in Baltimore City. So we're seeing some better steps being taken in the right direction when we look at human services in Baltimore City, but it's definitely room for improvement to make sure that our most vulnerable citizens amongst us are being cared for.
You used the word labyrinth when you talked about homeless services, and they are that. It's kind of a Quicksilver's cup of services. You'll take one of these and one of that and figure out what we're going to do, and then maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. And it's too complicated. It's simply too complicated. The first thing that has to be done is you must determine why people are homeless. The reasons are varied. There's not one reason for being homeless, and there are relatively few people out there who want to be homeless. We have to find a place for them here. We can't send them and say it's somebody else's problem. We'll pay for it, but we'll get it out of town, out of sight, out of mind. We can't do that. We have to deal with the human factor. We have to deal with these people because they require the help we can give them. And that's what humanity is all about. It's up to churches, by the way, to do part of the job. It's up to nonprofit organizations to do what they can do. The government's job is kind of marshal these resources, hold them together and make them work. Not necessarily reach into your pocket and say, here's a buck, go buy dinner.
Catherine, you agree that the system is currently in place? So let me get there. Let me just say that 3,000 people sleeping on the streets of our city every day. And I think that we have to not only put a face to it, but we have to put a real solution to it. For example, if you tell me that there's 3,000 people sleeping on our streets every day, and the federal government is telling you now that you just can't build shelters, because shelters mean that you can't service those people on a regular basis, then you have to build homes for the homeless. That's what the federal government has to do. We just lost a whole bunch of money because we did not adhere to the guidelines of what the federal government has said. We have to build homes for the homeless. So if you say there are 3,000 people sleeping on the streets of our city, and at $125 a square foot for a 300 square foot unit, that's $37,500, or round it off to $50,000, that's $150 million. Government does two things. It provides services and it provides opportunity. Somebody's got to build those facilities. And at the same time, who's going to pitch in to help? Because the city can't do it by itself. So the philanthropic community has to come to the table. The business community has to come to the table. The federal government has said it is willing to come to the table. The state has to come to the table. The city and the churches. And if it's $150 million, are we going to build 500 units over a 6-year period, or we're going to build, 1,000 units over a 3-year period? We have to sit down with all of those groups and say, what is the plan? How to make it transparent, and here's the end to that particular effort, so that we understand that who is sleeping on the streets of our city, whether it is those returning citizens who come home 10,000 a year to our city, the mentally ill, where we don't have enough facilities for them to go to, or someone whose mortgage they could no longer afford, are sleeping on the streets of our city. And let me just tell you, it's not just about servicing, it's about helping them to get to the next level. So are we going to provide the training and education? When we talk about that 38% of our population that doesn't read above the 6th or 8th grade level, some of those people are sleeping on our streets. When we talk about the 25% of the population that don't have high school diplomas, they're sleeping on our streets. So not only is it about making sure that we bring jobs and opportunity and training, we've got to get the city to utilize its resources and pull it all together. Because I tell folks, when we lift the least, we lift all of us. But it's putting real numbers to the problem and a real solution that's transparent so everybody can work together.
Cherry Hill, the neighborhood, was built as a segregated community for returning World War II soldiers and college. When Kevin Plank is finished building the Fort Covington Playground, will there be anything left for communities like Cherry Hill and Westport, which also sit on the middle branch, that have been historically left out of the equation?
I don't see why.
Is this a Baltimore question?
I don't see why the building of the Fort Covington project is going to leave out the neighborhoods that are nearby, Cherry Hill included. I think that that project, which I have favored from the outset, the revisions perhaps were necessary, the agreements that were made were necessary, but I think that will provide economic strength to the neighborhoods around it. Now, that doesn't always happen. You have to be careful. I remember what happened when they developed Atlantic City, New Jersey. They put up all those casinos, and they said it would help the neighborhoods behind them, and it never did. It simply collapsed. We have to be watchful. But the Fort Covington project was proposed and is being developed by the #1 entrepreneur in Baltimore right now. The man has made a remarkable personal and financial commitment to this city. And I would like to have more people like Kevin Plank in town to be able to create more of these projects, because they mean jobs, and they mean housing, and they mean economic development, and they mean strengthening the tax base. I know the TIF, Fort Covington TIF, is a crapshoot. It's a gamble. The payoff is down the road, but it's worth the investment, and I think it will benefit the communities, not hurt them.
Josh, is the Fort Covington deal as configured a done deal in your mind? Does it need any further review?
Yes, absolutely. The Fort Covington deal definitely needs further review. And I've been a opponent of how we develop in the city for TIFs for quite some time. Where we talk about the University of Maryland Biopark TIF, which occurred before this. More than 14 years ago, they received a sunny day loan from the state of Maryland. Under the auspices, they would create thousands of jobs, while just 1 block away, Ho Homes has the highest concentration of children in poverty in the city, and nothing has been done to substantively address that or impact that community. With Fort Covington, what we see once again is a business-first development model approach, rather than a community-centered model of development. The business-first approach is not sustainable in the long term, because what we see is that the city says we trust and we value this business more than we do the community members and the residents of our city. So we're going to take everything that they say for their word. Whatever the business decides to give the community, that's what they get. Rather than, if I were going to give a tip, we might as well just made the tip a little bit larger, included the footprint of Cherry Hill and Westport in the actual tip legislation, made sure that those communities were included in the process, look at a regional sustainability development model and what we talk about with the opportunity collaborative and what Port Covington can mean for true job creation, for true access to jobs, and creating transit. Again, I said the #1 need for transportation in Baltimore City is for low-income communities to have access to job hubs through that.
As mayor, would you try to undo the deal that is going to be signed tomorrow by the incumbent?
I believe that the deal can always be amended. It's legislation. It can always be amended, yes.
Catherine, you have the last word on Port Covington.
Well, let me just say, I think that there are a lot of lessons to be learned as it relates to the Port Covington deal, as it relates to how the city evaluates projects like that going forward. But as it relates to Cherry Hill, Cherry Hill is in the top 10 unemployed areas in our city, Old Town Hall being the #1. Whenever development takes place in our city, we ought to evaluate what its impact is going to be on the unemployed communities and the communities that have been devastated and left out for decades. I believe that there is a connection and should be a connection. And I also believe that in this agreement that has been put in place, and that's why the Cherry Hill community was a part of the community that came together after the Port Covington deal was first put on the table. Because I've sat and seen some of those meetings where people in Cherry Hill said, we need this, we want this, and those kinds of things should be taken into consideration every single time a deal like this is put on the table, and it has been. But let me just say, when you think about transportation in the future, I think the above-ground transportation that will happen in Port Covington ought to be spread over to Cherry Hill and to other parts of our community. That's why I say there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this particular deal, and for the mayor going forward, to look at how we evaluate these kinds of projects moving forward. And sometimes you have to look at yourself and say, do we, as a city, have that kind of expertise in place? And if we don't, what do we need to bring to the table to continue to move things like this forward? The investment, I believe, in Port Covington moving forward will make a difference in the city in the long run. It's how we understand that this city not only cannot be just for the poor, it has to be for everybody. And that means you've got to include everybody when you're talking about deals in Port Covington, deals in Cherry Hill. I mean, we've seen some of the changes that have taken place in Cherry Hill, and people now want to move into that area. But we want to see those same kinds of changes in Northwest Baltimore, where you see dilapidated houses, thousands of water houses. So if you want other areas to develop, and this is what I say, especially when I come down to this area, look, let's push some developers over to those other communities where development is needed. So I think the Port Covington deal with the ministers put together, with the community that Cherry Hill has put together, I think is a good deal moving forward. But more importantly, I think there are lessons that we will learn with development going forward.
I think that that's a bit of a tough lesson for the city to learn, but the fact that I've read 367 pages of the application, which is 535 pages, there's a 10-year gap where the bonds will not be able to afford to be paid off by the city. So that puts us in further fiscal debt. When we talk about the $80 million anticipated budget deficit that we're going into this year, on top of that, another $42 million at least. And then the fact that we haven't worked out our school funding formula, so we're already missing out on $25 million a year from other previous tips, which the Port Covington is larger than all of those. So we're going to miss out on at least $50 million a year in education funding. Can we afford that? And currently the Port Covington deal does not connect Cherry Hill and Westport to those job hubs or providing access to transit for those communities. So it should be.
Give you a chance to respond, then we're going to wrap up.
Well, let me just say that I'm sure most of you who, even with the 300 some odd pages, have read, there have been additions to that, including the reference to the school system, which was brought up by our own CEO. And let me just say, when we think about our schools and who should be accountable in the long run, which is another piece of legislation that we will go to Annapolis with, and that is to bring back some control by the city of the school system. And I'm not talking about in terms of dollars, because most of us know that there is a funding formula currently in place for our public school system. But again, accountability and transparency and audits are really important for every agency across the city, even evaluating the charter where it stands today. I mean, I don't know when the last time we looked at our charter and said what's working and what isn't working. Things that were put in place 25 or 30 years ago. Maybe they worked then, but may not be working now. We took and put our housing and community development and our HABC under one roof, and we missed missed out on funding as a result of it. So is this the time to look at whether we split those agencies? We're one of the few cities that does not have a total economic development department. So I think that this is an opportunity for the city to look at all of these areas and figure out how we move forward together with the people who live in our city, who've invested in our city, and aren't going anywhere.
All right, I'd like
And
to thank
I think too, we have to be honest that though she mentioned school funding, we still don't miss out $50 million a year with this more coming in there. We can't afford that.
But the deal, as it is now constructed, is still a good deal because it means jobs, economic development, growth in Baltimore.
If it was that good of a deal, Kevin Clark would have did and raked in all the millions on top. We would have taken the city dollars to do it.
I think in all the ways, a lot of great lessons, and I believe Joe Covington will teach us a lot of great lessons. And having spoken with Riley Brothers and other national companies now that are looking and making sure that when companies come into our city, that they also include our local developers and so forth. But people are looking at Baltimore, and I think somebody said it earlier, the story, you did actually, the stories that we are not telling about the greatness of the city. You know, while we've got a lot of issues in the city, we've got a lot of great things happening, and I don't know if you all have seen the new recreation centers that are going up over the city in Baltimore. We've got a lot of work to do, but we can do it together, and I look forward to working with all of you.
All right. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I think this is the first, hopefully not the only, candidate forum for the mayor's race in Baltimore. And again, thank you all very much. Thank you.
I want to make one final observation. You may have noticed this was a lot more civil than the Circus Maximus you may have watched last time.